On a frozen Montana highway, an ex-Navy SEAL hit the brakes so hard his canine lurched forward. Because in the blizzard, he saw something no man should ever witness. A widow clutching a baby to her chest. Children stumbling behind her, wrapped in thin layers that did nothing against the storm. All of them trembling in the wind, their footprints already fading into the snow. And when the cold tore at them like claws, she didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just kept walking, as if survival wasn't a choice, but a punishment she had learned to endure in silence. Then the SEAL stepped out into the storm, wind tearing at his coat, and spoke the words that would change all their lives. "Come with me. No one survives alone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more tales of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds that refuse to break. Your support truly means the world." The winter night pressed hard against the Montana highway, wind carving white scars across the dark as if the land itself were shivering beneath the storm. Inside the old pickup, Ethan Hale, 35, former Navy SEAL, and a man built from quiet storms, tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His hands, rough and scar-lined from years of breaching doors and dragging wounded teammates to safety, flexed unconsciously when the truck jolted over a patch of black ice. The dashboard light caught the sharp planes of his face, high cheekbones, a squared jaw darkened by several days of unshaved stubble, and eyes the color of cold steel. Eyes that had seen more than they ever admitted. His canine partner, Ranger, a 4-year-old sable German shepherd with a broad chest and ears always pricked toward danger, shifted in the passenger seat. Ranger's fur bristled at the edges, catching the dim glow like frost. He was trained to detect fear, grief, and the subtle tremor of human panic, and tonight his low rumble vibrated through the cab of the truck. Ethan wasn't heading anywhere urgent, not in the way he once did. He was simply returning to the old family ranch his parents left behind, the one that burned down 2 winters ago while he was deployed. He'd imagined this drive would be quiet, empty, maybe even numbing. Instead, the storm grew harsher, needles of snow whipping the windshield, reducing the world to a tunnel of white. Then, Ranger growled sharply, not at the wind, but at something alive. Ethan instinctively eased off the gas. His headlights swept across a shadow hunched near the roadside. At first, it looked like a fallen fence post, half buried in snow. Then it moved, and Ethan's breath caught. A woman staggered into view. A thin figure wrapped in a faded wool shawl woven with Lakota patterns, her long black hair plastered to her cheeks by melting frost. Her skin, a warm copper tone beneath the cold, had blanched into a worrying pallor. She clutched a bundled baby tightly to her chest, holding the infant as though the storm might rip the child away. Behind her stumbled 4 more children, all small, all shaking, their clothes not nearly warm enough for a night like this. Ranger let out a sharp bark. Ethan slammed the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed before steadying. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, heart surging in a way it hadn't since combat. Not fear, instinct. He threw the truck in park and stepped out into the slicing wind. The woman froze. Even exhausted, she stood with a protective fierceness, shoulders angled slightly forward, feet planted despite the snow slipping beneath them. Her dark eyes, large and watchful, held both terror and defiance. She looked like someone used to meeting danger alone. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice hoarse, tightening her grip on the baby. Ethan raised both gloved hands slowly, palms open. He observed everything, the trembling of her arms from cold and fatigue, the bluish tint on the children's lips, the way the oldest child pressed herself between her mother and him like a small, trembling shield. He noticed the silver necklace at the woman's throat, a traditional Lakota piece stamped with the motif of a running horse, and saw how fiercely she guarded the little ones behind her. His experience as a SEAL had taught him to read people in seconds. The woman wasn't aggressive. She was desperate, on the edge of collapse yet refusing to yield. Ranger hopped down from the passenger seat, landing softly beside Ethan, his posture alert but non-threatening. Snow clung to his whiskers, turning him into a silent sentinel. Ethan's voice, when he finally spoke, came out low and steady, the tone he once used with civilians in shock zones. "Come with me," he said. "No one survives alone." For a moment, nothing existed except the wind screaming across the highway and the quiet thud of his heartbeat. The woman blinked, snowflakes catching in her lashes. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply looked at her children, at their shaking knees and reddened fingers, and something in her resolve cracked just enough to let hope seep through. She nodded once, barely visible. Ethan moved instantly but gently, lifting the children one by one into the warm cab. Ranger backed up to make room, positioning himself between the kids and the door like a guardian. The baby whimpered when the heat touched his face, then settled. The woman climbed in last, hesitating only to look back down the deserted road, as if expecting the storm itself to chase her. Ethan shut the door behind her, feeling the weight of the decision settle into his bones, a familiar, steadying weight. He returned to the driver's seat, cranked the heater, and guided the truck off the highway toward the cabin he'd planned to face alone. Tonight, it would hold more than silence. It would hold the beginning of something none of them yet understood. The cabin settled into a fragile warmth, the kind that came slowly, like a fire learning to breathe. Snow tapped against the window panes in restless bursts, but inside, the air held the trembling stillness of people who hadn't felt safe in far too long. The children huddled under thick blankets borrowed from an old cedar trunk, their cheeks no longer the alarming shade of blue they'd worn on the roadside. Even Ranger, Ethan's 4-year-old sable German shepherd, stretched out near the hearth with a quiet vigilance, his amber eyes tracking every shift in the room. The woman sat closest to the fire, her posture straight despite exhaustion. Her long black hair clung to her shoulders, damp from melted snow. The shawl she wore, a woven Lakota design in deep reds and charcoal tones, had dried stiff in the heat. Beneath it, her frame appeared slender but resolute, the kind of strength shaped not by choice but by survival. When she finally spoke her name, Sarah Wiyaka, her voice held the soft resonance of someone careful with speech, as though every word had to be weighed before leaving her lips. Her story unspooled slowly, not because she wanted to hide it, but because the memories cut deep. Her father had vanished on these Montana mountains 15 years earlier, leaving behind only unanswered prayers and a family that refused to mourn a man without a grave. With his absence, Sarah's world had weakened. Her mother, fearing for her daughter's future, agreed to marry her into another Lakota family, one with traditions as old as the land itself, but with expectations Sarah could never meet. Her husband, Tawan, had once been a man with broad shoulders and quiet pride, but whiskey turned that pride into obsession. He demanded a son. Each daughter's birth drove him deeper into bitterness, and his hands, once steady from working leather and carving bows, became instruments of rage. There were apologies at first, tearful promises and sober days. Then the apologies grew fewer, the bruises darker. Sarah didn't raise her voice as she spoke. That, Ethan realized, was part of what made the story hurt more. When the children finally drifted into sleep, one resting against Ranger's flank as though the dog were a living blanket, Ethan moved to sit across from her. The fire illuminated the sharp edges of his face, the pronounced jawline, the slight curve of an old cut near his brow, the stubble shadowing his cheeks. But his eyes softened, turning from steel to something weary, something human. He spoke quietly, the way soldiers sometimes do when they step back into civilian air yet still carry the weight of sand and gunpowder in their lungs. "My parents' ranch burned down 2 winters ago," he said. "I was deployed. I didn't make it back in time." He didn't elaborate, but the way his gaze dipped revealed the depth of that regret. The scent of burning pine filled the silence between them. He continued, recounting pieces of his last deployment, not the classified parts, only the human ones. Operation Silent Dusk, 3 hostages saved. 5 of his men lost. He didn't describe how their faces still visited him at night or the metallic taste of failure that lingered on his tongue long after he returned home. But the tension in his hands, the way his thumb rubbed the scar on his wrist, spoke the truth. Sarah watched him closely, studying him the way someone accustomed to danger studies a fire, drawn to the warmth but wary of the burn. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pity. She simply listened, a gift rarer than comfort. Ranger lifted his head, as though sensing the heaviness in Ethan's breathing. The dog nudged his elbow once, grounding him. Ethan's lips twitched in something close to gratitude. The flames crackled. Snow clawed at the windows. 2 lives that had never been meant to intersect began quietly threading into each other. Finally, Sarah whispered, "You carry ghosts." "So do you," Ethan replied. The truth hung between them, fragile but binding. 2 broken paths crossing beneath one roof, not out of destiny but out of necessity. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her baby, whose tiny fingers curled against her chest. She looked toward the sleeping girls lined against the wall and let out a breath that trembled with exhaustion rather than fear. "For the first time in years," she murmured, "they're sleeping without waking at every sound." Ethan nodded, though emotion tightened his jaw. "You're safe here," he said, a promise spoken by a man who didn't make promises lightly. The storm outside roared louder, rattling the cabin door. Yet inside something softer took root. Not trust, not yet, but an unspoken acknowledgement. Broken people sometimes survive better when they stop trying to survive alone. The fire dimmed to embers. Ranger settled his head onto his paws. Sarah leaned back against the wall, eyes heavy, breath easing out in long waves. Ethan watched over them. The woman, the children, even the storm, with the silent vigilance of a man who had lost too much and refused to lose more. And somewhere in that small, weather-worn cabin, 2 wounded lives began to find the faintest rhythm of healing. The storm eased the next afternoon, leaving a bruised sky and a thin crust of ice over everything the wind had touched. The cabin, though weather-beaten and patched in places, stood firm against the winter quiet. Ethan spent the early hours outside repairing the horse shed, a squat structure with warped boards and rusting hinges. His gloves, stiff with cold, gripped the hammer with mechanical steadiness. The rhythm of the work anchored him, letting his mind rest in the ways sleep no longer could. Ranger stayed nearby, pacing slow circles around the shed. The dog's sable coat glimmered under the pale light, and every now and then he looked toward the cabin with the intuition of a creature attuned to human storms as much as weather ones. Inside, Sarah moved quietly through the small rooms, tidying what little there was. Her long black hair was braided loosely down her back, the dark rope of it swinging gently as she bent to gather stray firewood or shake out dusty linens. Her daughters helped in soft, timid ways, folding blankets, stacking tin cups, each movement careful, as though afraid the cabin itself might shatter if they were too loud. When she knelt beside the old cedar bed frame to look for extra quilts, her fingers brushed against something hard, a wooden chest, small, square, its edges smoothed by years of use. She pulled it into the light. The children grew silent. Sarah lifted the lid. The breath left her body in a single, broken exhale. Inside lay a woven blanket, deep indigo threaded with lightning-shaped streaks of white and silver, the broken lightning line. No 2 families wove the pattern the same way, and this one carried the unmistakable signature of her own bloodline. The edges were frayed, the wool softened by age, but she could see her father's hands in every knot, every line. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. The scent of wood smoke and sage from years long gone seemed to bloom from its folds. She saw flashes, her father lifting her onto his shoulders, wrapping this very blanket around her during bitter winters, humming old songs that curled like incense into the night. A storm rose behind her eyes. When Ethan stepped through the doorway, brushing snow from his coat, he caught the shift in her posture before he saw the blanket. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, brittle from the inside out. Where did you get this?" Ethan froze, his breath hitching. He didn't need to look at the blanket. He knew exactly which one it was. He had kept it hidden not out of disrespect, but because he had been unable to face it. He removed his gloves slowly, as though exposing his hands made the truth harder to hide. 15 years ago, he began, his voice steady but hollow. My truck went off the mountain road. Snowstorm hit fast. I was hanging half over a ravine. Couldn't move my legs. Sarah didn't blink. A man appeared, Ethan continued, out of nowhere. Lakota. Strong build, long black hair. Kind eyes despite the cold. His jaw tightened. He wrapped me in that blanket, tried to pull me out. Ranger stepped closer, sensing the shift in the air. Ethan swallowed. He got me free, but the ground beneath him, it gave way. The room fell painfully still. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, not with a sob, but with the weight of recognition. Time, location, the design of the blanket. There could be no mistake. It was her father. She rose abruptly, gathering her baby and motioning for her daughters. Their wide eyes darted between her and Ethan, sensing something monumental, something cracked. Ethan's chest tightened with panic as she made for the door. Snow whipped inside as she opened it. Sarah. He stepped outside after her, the cold biting sharply at his face. She kept walking through the fresh snow, her boots sinking deep with each step. Ethan followed, breath turning to vapor in the frigid air. Sarah, he said again, voice raw, please. She turned only when her children stopped behind her, too tired to move farther. The baby whimpered against her shoulder, his small fingers curling into her braid. Ethan's voice broke. Your father died saving me. A gust of wind rose, tugging at her shawl. I didn't go to your family, he said. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it wasn't my place. But the truth is… He lowered his gaze, shame carving new lines into his face. I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd taken from you. Afraid of seeing the look you might give me now. Sarah's eyes glistened with a pain so deep it seemed older than the storm around them. I lived, he whispered, and he didn't, and I've carried that with me every day. The children huddled closer to their mother, their breaths forming a fragile cloud between them. Sarah blinked hard, fighting tears. Her voice wavered. Do you know what it is? She said softly. To wait 15 years for someone who never came back? Ethan lifted his head. The answer was carved into the way he stood, shoulders slumped, unguarded. Yes, he said, more than you know. The wind softened, as though listening. Sarah looked at her children, tired, cold, shivering, then back at the cabin glowing faintly through the snow. Her grief didn't lessen, but something practical, maternal, rooted, rose above it. She drew a shaking breath. I'm not forgiving you, she said. Not tonight. Ethan nodded, accepting the wound fully. But the children, she whispered, need warmth, and a roof, and sleep. She turned toward the cabin. We go back. And with that, she stepped past him, her daughters following like a fragile procession, leaving Ethan standing in the snow with his guilt laid bare under the gray Montana sky. The days that followed took on a rhythm built from quiet movements and cautious breaths. Snow lingered on the ground in soft drifts, turning the ranch into a landscape of pale, muffled stillness. Yet, inside the small cabin, life began to reemerge in slow, uncertain ways, as if warmth were something that had to be relearned. Ethan worked from dawn each morning, splitting logs behind the shed while steam rose from his breath in steady bursts. His strong shoulders and deliberate movements, shaped by years of military discipline, made the work look effortless, though every swing of the axe carried its own ghosts. His dark hair often fell forward when he bent to stack the chopped wood, the stray strands breaking the image of a man carved from iron. Ranger stayed close, the 4-year-old canine's attentive eyes following him with unwavering loyalty. Inside, Sarah found her own rhythm. Her tall, slender frame moved with a quiet grace as she taught her daughters how to fold blankets, prepare simple meals, and hum the old Lakota cradle songs at night. Her skin, warm copper beneath the firelight, seemed to regain its natural glow with each passing day. Sometimes she would gather a small bundle of dried sage, lighting it by the threshold. The smoke curled in soft spirals, rising gently as she whispered a prayer of gratitude to the spirits and to the father she had lost. Ethan didn't understand the rituals at first, but he stood respectfully, his deep-set eyes contemplative. He had lived a life governed by commands and protocols where survival was forged through grit rather than faith. Watching Sarah perform these small acts, rooted in heritage, grief, and strength, shifted something inside him, its softened edges hardened by war and regret. He began teaching the children small skills: how to stack kindling safely, how to read the wind before lighting a fire, how to stand behind him or Sarah if a strange vehicle ever approached. The oldest girl, with her straight black hair and protective posture, watched him carefully at first. But soon she mirrored his lessons to the younger ones, determined to play her part in keeping her family safe. 7 days passed like this, quiet, slow, but not empty. Then the engines came, and the children heard it first, a low mechanical growl in the distance cutting through the winter air with unfamiliar sharpness. Ranger's ears snapped upright. Ethan looked up from repairing a loose shutter, his muscles tensing instinctively. A polished black truck rolled into the yard, splattering snow as it stopped. Behind it came a county sheriff's vehicle. The scene felt wrong instantly. Too composed, too clean for the rugged drive leading to his isolated ranch. The door of the black truck opened and Tywin stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have once been handsome but had long since been spoiled by resentment. His dark hair was tied loosely at the back, though several strands fell over a forehead, creased by years of alcohol and anger. His jaw carried the shadow of unkempt stubble, and his eyes, sharp, narrow, distrustful, scanned the yard with a kind of entitlement that made Ethan's pulse tighten. Behind him emerged Sheriff Cole Maddox, a man in his late 50s, stocky with a weather-beaten face and thinning gray hair. His uniform looked slightly too small for his build, but he carried himself with the calm, steady authority of someone who had dealt with too many winter accidents and too many domestic calls to be easily fazed. Tywin's lips twisted into a smirk as soon as he spotted Sarah through the window. "Well," he called out, loud and mocking, "look at this, my wife playing house with a soldier boy." Sarah stepped outside slowly, the baby held securely in her arms. Her daughters clustered behind her like frightened birds. The bruises on her wrists, faint greenish shadows, had begun to fade but were still visible. Ethan moved to stand between her and Tawan without saying a word. Ranger stood at his side, hackles slightly raised but posture controlled, waiting for a cue. Tywin scoffed. "Thought you could run from me. Thought you could take my children." His voice was hoarse with indignation, but beneath it was something colder, possession. Sheriff Maddox held up a hand. "Let's keep this civil, folks." He approached the cabin and surveyed the scene. Ethan standing firm, Sarah trembling but resolute, the children shrinking behind her, Ranger poised and ready. Maddox's eyes softened when they fell on the youngest girl clinging to her mother's leg. Inside the cabin, Maddox asked a few questions, not loud ones, not prying ones, but careful, measured ones. And the room answered for Sarah long before she spoke. The way the children recoiled from Tywin's voice, the bruising on Sarah's wrists, the fear flickering across her daughters' faces at the mention of going back. When Sarah finally described her escape, her voice low, steady, without embellishment, Maddox listened without interruption. His lined face shifted, tightening with an understanding earned through years of seeing too many women walk into the station with similar expressions. Maddox turned to Tywin. "I'm opening a file for domestic abuse," he said. "You will appear in town court tomorrow morning." Tywin's nostrils flared. "You can't keep my family from me. "They're not safe with you," Maddox replied simply. Ethan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Not victory, but the relief of seeing someone else finally witness what Sarah had endured for years. Tawan glared at Ethan. "This isn't over." He jabbed a finger toward the children. "You're all coming home with me tomorrow." "No," Sarah said quietly. "We're not." The sheriff escorted Tawan outside. The man climbed back into his truck, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed off the empty hills. Snow burst up beneath the tires as he sped away, leaving behind a trail of exhaust and ugly promises. Maddox lingered a moment longer. "I'll do everything I can," he told Sarah, his voice gentler now. "You and the kids deserve better." Then he tipped his hat, returned to his car, and drove off the property. Silence returned to the ranch, heavy but no longer hopeless. Ethan looked at Sarah. She looked at him, and though neither spoke, something passed between them, a recognition that the world had finally witnessed the part of her story she'd never been able to speak out loud without consequence. Ranger nudged Ethan's leg, sensing the slow unwinding of tension. The storm was coming again tomorrow, in a different form. Papers, testimonies, decisions that could shape the rest of their lives. But for the moment, standing in the quiet yard, Sarah and her children remained exactly where they needed to be, under a roof that would not let them freeze, beside a man who would no longer let them face danger alone. The town hall of Carbon County was a modest brick building trimmed with white paint that had begun to peel in the winter cold. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of pine polish and old paper, a scent that clung to the benches and the wooden rails like a memory. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting pale gold across the room. Sarah stood at the front, tall and composed despite the tension that tightened her shoulders. Her long black hair was braided neatly down her back, and the copper hue of her skin appeared almost luminous under the soft light. She wore a simple dark dress borrowed from a neighborly woman Maddox had contacted, a gesture the sheriff said felt right for court. In her eyes lingered a mixture of sorrow and courage, like someone who had learned to walk through storms long before she ever fled one. Ethan sat a few rows behind her, his presence steady. His broad frame, square jaw, and calm expression brought a quiet gravity into the room. He wore a clean flannel shirt and worn jeans, his military straight posture betraying his nerves even when his face did not. Ranger lay at his feet, watchful, his sable coat gleaming in the slivers of sun. Though the dog wasn't officially permitted inside, Maddox had murmured to the bailiff, "He's part of the story," and no one argued. Judge Helen Rourke presided over the hearing. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pinned into a bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Lines of empathy creased her face, balanced by an authority earned from decades of dealing with miners, ranchers, and families caught in winter shadows. Her voice carried both warmth and command. When Sarah began to speak, the room quieted into a breathless stillness. She told the court about the early years of her marriage, how Tawan had once been gentle, how the hope for a son had twisted into bitterness, how alcohol had filled the cracks of his disappointments until his anger became the language of their home. She recounted the bruises that bloomed across her arms and the fear that seeped into her daughter's eyes with every slammed door. Her voice didn't tremble. It had the steadiness of a woman who had survived too long to break now. She described the night of the blizzard, how she wrapped her baby close, gathered her daughters, and ran into a storm that could kill them, because staying behind would kill them slower. Judge Rourke listened intently, her expression softening with each word. Sheriff Maddox stepped forward next. He stood firmly, the bulk of his brown jacket stretching across his frame. His weathered face held the same sternness he had brought to countless emergencies across the county. He testified to what he had seen at Ethan's ranch. The way the children flinched at the sight of their father, Sarah's lingering bruises, the protective stance they took behind Ethan, and the calm, structured safety the former SEAL had created in only a few days. Maddox's voice was level, but his eyes flickered with an anger he rarely allowed himself in uniform. Tawan sat at the opposite bench, arms crossed tightly over his broad chest. His long black hair was pulled back haphazardly, and the slight redness in his eyes hinted at either alcohol from the night before or a morning spent simmering in rage. His jaw clenched as Sarah spoke. He rolled his eyes during Maddox's testimony. He scoffed when Ethan's character was mentioned, but he could not change the truth that hung thick in the air. After a long pause, Judge Rourke delivered her ruling. The courtroom remained utterly silent as her voice echoed through the chamber. The marriage is dissolved. Full custody is granted to the mother. A protective order is issued effective immediately. Mr. Tawin, you are prohibited from approaching Ms. Wayaka or her children within 300 yards. Sarah closed her eyes, not in triumph, just in relief so deep it hollowed her lungs. Tawan shot to his feet, anger flashing across his face, but two deputies stepped forward before he could say a word. Judge Rourke's gavel struck once, decisive and unyielding. When the proceedings ended, Ethan escorted Sarah and her daughters outside, walking at her pace, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Ranger pressed his head against the leg of the oldest girl, offering silent comfort. For the first time in years, Sarah breathed air that felt like freedom. The ranch welcomed them back in a soft hush of snow and timber crackle. Work began almost instantly, not because it was required, but because new beginnings demand movement. Ethan built a new room onto the cabin, his strong arms lifting beams with practiced precision. He repaired the sagging roof, replaced old boards, and reinforced the fence line that bordered the property. Each swing of the hammer seemed to strip another fragment of guilt from his shoulders. Sarah tended to the land with gentle determination. She planted wildflower seeds along the front porch, blue flax and prairie coneflower, saying the earth deserved color after so much winter. She stitched quilts from scraps of fabric, humming lullabies with notes that warmed even the coldest mornings. She knelt in the soil with her daughters, teaching them how to tuck young roots into the ground with care. The children's laughter began to stretch across the yard like sunlight. They chased Ranger near the woodpile, helped Ethan carry nails, and collected stones to border the new flower beds. The cabin no longer felt like a waypoint. It felt like a home with foundations deeper than the frost. One evening, when the sky burned orange behind the hills, Sarah stepped onto the porch and watched Ethan secure the final plank of the new room. He straightened, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and looked toward her. There was understanding between them, gratitude, a cautious hope. Two lives, once shattered, were being carefully fitted back, together, piece by piece, day by day. And for the first time since the storm, the future no longer felt like something to fear. Spring crept into Montana like a shy visitor, brushing the plains with hesitant strokes of green. Patches of snow lingered in the shaded places, but the air carried a softness that made even the wind sound less like warning and more like invitation. On one such morning, Ethan loaded the truck with blankets, a few gifts wrapped in plain brown paper, and enough food for the long drive. Ranger hopped into the back seat, tail sweeping in anticipation. Sarah stood on the porch in a long blue dress that brought out the rich copper in her skin. Her hair, black and shining, was braided with a single white bead her mother had given her years ago. The children clustered around her, each wearing small necklaces made from polished stones. There was nervous excitement in their eyes. They had never traveled far from home, and yet today they would return to a place that had once felt unsafe, but was now the doorway to their future. The drive onto the reservation wound through rolling hills and towering pines. The landscape grew familiar to Sarah in ways both tender and painful. When they pulled into the community area, a cluster of modest homes surrounding a larger communal lodge, her breath caught. Waiting on the steps was her mother, Marianne Wayaka, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair braided tightly, high cheekbones, and eyes that held the depth of old sorrow and unbroken strength. Her frame was sturdy, and although grief had carved delicate lines around her mouth, her posture carried the quiet resilience of someone who had endured more than most. When Sarah ran into her arms, Marianne held her daughter with both relief and heartbreak. She cupped the children's faces, murmuring their Lakota names, blessing each with a kiss to the forehead. Then she turned to Ethan. He removed his hat respectfully. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice lower than usual, steeped in humility. Marianne studied him. Her gaze was sharp enough to find the truth beneath any man's words. She saw the muscle tension in his jaw, the weariness that clung like a shadow behind his calm eyes, the quiet discipline in his posture. A soldier, she understood immediately. A man carrying more weight than he allowed anyone to see. Without speaking, she motioned for him to follow her inside the lodge. The room felt warm and sacred. Woven blankets hung along the walls, soft drumming played faintly from a distant speaker, and the air carried the faint aroma of sage. They sat facing one another. Sarah sat nearby, clutching the baby in her lap. Ethan rested his hands on his knees, ready to face the confession he had carried for 15 years. He began with the winter storm, the icy road, the moment the truck slid toward the ravine. He spoke of the Lakota man who came out of the white blur like a guardian, the hands that wrapped him in a blanket, the desperate pull to free him. His voice wavered when he described the moment the ground gave way beneath the man's feet. Silence filled the space when he finished. Marianne closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. But there was no anger, only the long-awaited release of a grief she had never been able to bury. She placed a hand over her heart. "He returned to the earth protecting another life," she whispered. "That is a warrior's passing. He would not want blame to remain where gratitude should be." Ethan lowered his head, the relief bittersweet. Nothing could undo what had happened, but forgiveness, offered freely, loosened a knot that had lived in his chest for years. Marianne touched his arm gently. "Tell me what you intend with my daughter." Ethan looked up, steady. "To stand beside her," he said, "to give those children a safe home, to make sure none of them face another winter alone." She nodded once. That was enough. That evening, the communal lodge filled with softly murmured greetings and the rustle of ceremonial garments. The air shimmered with a warmth that came not from heat, but from people gathering with love and anticipation. Sarah stood near the front, her shawl embroidered with a new lightning pattern, one symbolizing new beginnings rather than endings. Ethan stepped forward holding a small silver ring. He had carved a thin lightning line along its surface, a quiet homage to the blanket and the man who had saved his life. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with reverence. He looked at Sarah, the woman who had walked through storms he could never imagine, and said, "If you'll allow me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you and the children never face another storm alone." Sarah's breath caught. Her eyes glistened. She nodded. Marianne and several elders stepped forward carrying a star quilt, a large radiant blanket stitched in vibrant blues, greens, and sunset reds. They draped it over Ethan and Sarah's shoulders, joining them beneath its single shared warmth. It symbolized protection, unity, and the merging of paths. A circle formed around them, family, neighbors, elders, and children holding hands. A soft chant rose, ancient and gentle, blessing their union. Ranger trotted around the circle with a small strip of cloth tied to his collar, earning soft laughs as he became, unofficially, the ceremony's four-legged witness. The marriage was simple, heartfelt, and profoundly rooted in both tradition and tomorrow. It belonged not only to the past they were healing, but to the future they were building. When they returned to the ranch days later, the land seemed brighter. Snowmelt revealed patches of resilient grass. The children ran across the yard with a freedom that felt like music. Ethan stood beside Sarah on the porch as the sun dipped low over the Montana plains. Her hand found his, her head rested against his shoulder. "This land used to feel empty," he said quietly, "like my life was just ice and silence." Sarah watched the children play, their laughter, ringing across the yard. Ranger barked once, bounding after them. "And now?" she asked softly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Now the winters don't feel so cold, not with you beside me." She smiled, leaning into him, and together they watch their family, new, imperfect, miraculous, take root in a place that had once known only loss. In the fading light, the ranch breathed again, and for the first time in many years, so did they. Some people say miracles arrive with thunder, or angels, or signs written across the sky. But sometimes, a miracle looks like a weary soldier stopping on a frozen highway. Sometimes it looks like a mother who refuses to give up, even when the world tells her she should. And sometimes, it looks like two broken lives finding each other at the exact moment God decides they've carried enough pain. Maybe that's the real lesson here. We don't always know why storms come. We don't always understand why we lose the people we love, or why the road becomes so hard that our knees nearly touch the ground. But God places people in our path, at the right time, in the right season, to remind us that no winter lasts forever. If you're watching this tonight and you feel like life has been cold for too long, hold on. Redemption doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks toward you slowly, gently, like a hand reaching through the snow. And if this story touched your heart, please share it so someone else can feel a little less alone. Leave a comment. Tell us what part spoke to you most. And if you'd like more stories of hope, healing, and second chances, please subscribe and join our family here. May God bless you, keep you warm through every storm, and remind you, in His perfect timing, that none of us are meant to walk this life alone. Amen.